Hello my friends, I hope you are well and ready for another meeting with a bit of plastic, resin and metal. It's been a long time since I had any Soviet vehicle on the channel, so it's the perfect time to unpack a classic set with a heavy tank. But let's see if this well-known producer will surprise us with anything this time. I don't think so. The instructions are long but clear and undoubtedly guide the modeler through all the stages of construction. In the box there is a metal barrel, which is a little surprise to me, a bag with some metal parts, string and poly caps. In addition, a set of transfers which I probably won't use and a few green frames with parts. As usual in the case of Tamiya, we are witnessing the implementation of the principle less is better than more. Personally, it doesn't bother me at all, and I'm even glad because I'm sure that it's not the number of parts that determines the quality of the model. The accessories I have collected for the model include first of all a small useful book with a lot of reference photos. The printed creak tracks are a great addition, especially since one track is supposed to be torn off and making it from the Tamiya set would be rather impossible or at least difficult to make. The metal barrel with a beautiful cast muzzle brake and mesh for the ventilation grills are definitely better than what the manufacturer threw in the box. For towing cables I have two different sets here, I will definitely use one of them. So let's get to work. Since the model will stand on uneven ground, I decided to prepare a movable chassis which will definitely make it easier for me to place it in the right place on the diorama. I drill a hole in each axis, insert the wire into it and it's almost ready. I still have to cut the stabilizing pins on the hull and I can assemble the entire suspension. Of course it's worth leaving the first and last wheel attached at the factory pins, because thanks to this we have the appropriate level of suspension guaranteed by these stably set wheels. But if you think you can handle it without stabilization, do as I did here. Now all you have to do is to bend the wire and cut it, and you can enjoy with the movable suspension in your model. Easy peasy. Now I'm starting the most laborious stage, which is preparing the appropriate appearance of the cast steel texture. This will be a long and multi-element process, so get ready for a long story with several plots but one character. Of course you can do it straight from the box, but believe me, Soviet heavy tanks didn't look so elegant. After gluing the main parts of the turret, I started work by preparing the gun shield. The first thing you need to do is look in a book or in the internet to check how much we have to interfere with the surface of the plastic. From my observations, it turns out that a lot. In addition to standard filling with a file, it's worth using glue to soften the surface and the metal brush or an old stiff brush to properly prepare the plastic. You also have to reckon with the fact that some details have to be recreated, because during surface preparation they may simply disappear or it will turn out that they are not sharp enough. This was the case with the two screws at the front of the shield, which I made from plastic. They look much better now than before processing. It was similar on the front of the turret, where I replaced the round element with new ones stamped with the punch and die set from RP Tools. All you need is the right thickness of plastic and you have ready elements in a few seconds. The previously mentioned metal barrel from Aber is definitely better than the standard product from the box. Here we have a great looking muzzle brake, and the construction of the whole set is trivially simple and consists of 6 elements. It's worth investing a few coins to buy. In the case of a Soviet product, the digital markings of the castings must be in the right places. The simplest solution is to use the digits from the frame, which are quite similar in size. I used the frame from the old Italy Tiger, which was being built by my son. I cut out a few numbers and prepared them for placement on the armor. Of course, the sharp knife is the basis for this task. For proper placement, all you need is a good plastic glue, which will soften and straighten the numbers. Then all you need to do is gently set them with a knife and press them to the surface so that they blend into the plastic. After drying, I repeat the whole procedure with softening the plastic. I also add slightly diluted putty to create the most visible surface of the casting. This is not complicated or sophisticated technique, but it brings great results, which we will probably confirm after working on your model. After basic drying, which to tell you the truth takes a dozen or so minutes, but which allows for further work, I prepared pieces of green stuff to arrange weld beads. Of course, I do this on all elements that require it. Proper profiling of welds is best done with a special U-shaped tool, a knife with a sharp or flat end. This will give different finishes, which is normal if we look at what Soviet workers were releasing from the factory. The photos speak for themselves. This quality was far from the production standards of peacetime. On the main element of the turret, the first task I had to do was to cut out the welds that the producer had prepared. They are too perfect. They won't fit with the uneven surface of the cast steel that I will prepare in a moment. But remember to be careful during this job, because it's easy to make unexpected damages. In addition to the places for welds, I also drilled holes for the side handles, which I will prepare using copper wire. They will look much better than the plastic ones, and the time of their execution will probably be the same if we take into account that the plastic requires cleaning. Apart from that, you will be able to brag about another modification to your fellow modelers or take a few additional shots to show on YouTube. Okay, the next important step in preparing the surface is to file a few places with a handy milling machine. The first place is a line around the turret, which, contrary to appearances, is not an imitation of weld as many have said, but a trace of the connection of the casting mold. Here we will also make a new trace. In addition, the irregular traces on the sides of the turret are also worth adding. In one line with the super tool like milling machine, an ordinary knife is also a tool that will be useful when working on the texture. You can use it to make thin lines and imperfections, which are abundant in this case. It's worth slightly softening all the edges with plastic glue. This will also tidy up the surface of the model a bit. Right now I repeat the whole procedure again with softening the surface with glue and applying putty. If the putty wasn't applied in a pretty way before, now it's the perfect time for some extreme casting. Applying it straight from the tube and creating irregular thick layers in an easy way to create imperfections. Even patting it with a sweaty finger is advisable, because it will also give the right look, slightly different than when applying it with a toothpick. Tamiya epoxy putty is ideal for creating thick traces of joining the forms on the surface that we are currently preparing. I apply the putty into the grooves I have previously carved out, shaping it with various tools. Considering the photos of the real vehicle, this is not a difficult task, but you have to be moderate and reasonable when it comes to the number and size of these elements. Additionally, on the lower part of the turret there are characteristic traces of cutting off the forms, which I also recreate using Tamiya putty for this. It's as simple as applying new traces on the commander's turret. This is such a characteristic element that it's worth working on it a bit, especially since the producer didn't do it expressively enough. And this is how the turret looks after basic work on the new texture. Tasty. I noticed that my method of gluing a nut into the model and using it as a handle is becoming more and more popular. Many of you wrote in the comments that its simplicity and effectiveness are great. I am very happy. In this model I did the same, although in some situations I also used the octopus jig. The holes for the handles, which are drilled earlier, will now be used to mount the bent copper rods. As I said a couple minutes ago, this is much better solution than plastic parts. Before I glued the gun cover and the gun mounted there, the edges of the turret had to be filled down a bit. They were too perfect for Soviet production, and besides, the photos also confirmed my decision. A few minutes of work with a file was quite enough. And now it was time to fill in all the places that I had so carefully cut out earlier and create new wells. As before, I used green stuff for this, which I rolled into thin sausages and arranged with a toothpick in the right places. Perfect work for listening to music or an audiobook, especially when there is quite a lot of it, as here. Gluing the turret together is pure pleasure. A few drops of glue and the whole element is ready. Let's go to the hull to make the appropriate appearance of Soviet vehicle. First, the fenders. I decided that the front parts will be removed. Cutting out these fragments is not a complicated job, and I did it with an ordinary plastic pliers. Then, using flat pliers, I bent the edges of the fenders. Some of them without using hot air from the accelerator, but I made the work easier, and here and there I heated up the plastic. That is, on one hand I made the life easier, but on the other, every touch and stronger squeeze of the plastic left a mark which was not entirely my intention and the expected result. Finally, I managed to properly destroy the ideal surfaces of the fenders and make them look appropriate. And once again I implemented the procedure of softening the plastic, working exactly the same way as on the turret. After adding the details, I also placed the resin box from Beats Creek on the fender. Fortunately, I did not bend it too much here, so the box fits quite well in its place. The rest of the hull is also properly prepared, including the next details added to the right places. I made some small drilling on the engine plates just to have some more detailing on the model. Not a big deal, just a couple minutes of work. Then I made the cut marks for the armor plates the old good way by cutting them with a knife and smoothing the cut edges with thin glue. For the umpteenth time on this model I started working with diluted putty, applying it to the rear side parts of the hull. They will differ significantly from other surfaces due to the different way these elements are made. In short, they will be smoother but not perfectly smooth like a table. I did the same with the hatch above the engine. This will also be the element that distinguishes it from the entire engine cover. The second set of photo-etched elements are air intake meshes, which are definitely better than the small metal piece from the set. Aber once again did a great job. After shaping and adding wire hinges, the entire element is ready to be glued. I wanted to write that it's best to do this using CA glue, but that's probably obvious. No, that's not what I mean. The most important thing is not to stick to the model while gluing the mesh. Such a trivial statement, but who among us hasn't done it in the past? I think many have had such an adventure where some element literally stayed in the hand for a long time. After the glue dried, I shaped the meshes appropriately with the tip of hobby knife and made small tears. They look great. Okay, finally I prepared a base with a rather uneven terrain on which the tank is to stand. Now the movable chassis will be most useful because I can freely place the wheels on the surface. Temporarily I put a piece of blue tack under the front and rear to stabilize the model more. Now I can glue them permanently. I know it may look like unnecessary detailing of my work, but it was more convenient for me and in the end it was the best possible solution. To refresh my memory, I reached for a book from the AK about painting vehicles during World War II. The two second pieces of information that I need are primarily the primer color and the camo color. The first one is, put it simply, dark grey, which will only be visible on the bottom of the hull, so it will only be applied there. The proper color of the vehicle is Protective K, which is the best match in this situation. I treat it as a base, so in the end the color on the model will differ significantly from the initial one. I started the work by preparing the metal surfaces. All of them received a layer of primer which will increase adhesion. I applied the product to both small elements and the barrel using a brush, but it can also be done with an airbrush. As I mentioned, I applied a dark primer to the bottom of the hull. I think that this isn't very often seen with Soviet vehicles because modelers usually avoid this part by not painting it at all or cover the entire model with green paint. For me, similarly to German vehicles, this part of the hull is the most inaccessible surface of the tank, so I assume that the workers or soldiers involved in painting probably didn't care about it as much as other parts of the vehicle. Painting a vehicle green is not a big deal without any sophisticated methods or solutions. Simply cover the surface with proper green paint. No compromises, no unnecessary playing with some magic tricks, just a simple, quick painting. But truly speaking, some kind of magic will come later. For the truck color I have my proven color mixture of black, dark brown and silver. This is a perfect shade for later weathering. With the trucks already on the table I painted the traces left by the road and drive wheels. I painted or rather drew the polished metal with a pencil and rubbed it with a silicone tip and a bit of gunmetal pigment. The polished trucks are through steel wheels, which I also prepare in a metallic finish, but I do it by painting the edges with silver paint. I prepare the drive wheels in a similar way where I rub all the teeth properly on all sides. The next stage of painting the green is to prepare two levels of highlights. The first is a mixture of paint in ratio of 70% of the base color and 30% of lighter shade. Note that the shade is quite cold, completely different than if you added yellow. And it's that little bit of magic that turns green into even more green and then adds even more green. The difference is significant, which can be seen perfectly here by comparing the hull and the turret of the tank. The second layer of highlights is 50-50 ratio. The difference will be easily visible. Now some fake shadows. I wonder if there is anything here that needs commenting, but probably not. Just more painting. I lightened all the details by painting them with a brush. Olive green shade gave a big contrast. I can say that at one point I started to wonder if I had chosen the right color, but after the paint dried I stopped having doubts. Everything is okay. To paint the tactical numbers I used stickers from a model I had built some time ago. Of course I could have painted the numbers by hand, but I decided that this inscription would look much better. The whole process of preparing the stickers was very simple. Before weathering, I decided to prepare all the elements that were to enrich the appearance of the model. First I prepared the tarps. I used previously colored pieces of paper tissue. Now I will soak them again in paint and PVA glue. Drying with an accelerator is useful if we don't want to waste time. It's enough to bring the paper to a state in which it won't dirty the fingers. Before laying, I moistened the surface with tap water. This will make it easier to shape the paper properly. It's worth using tweezers for laying, but you have to be careful not to damage the paper, unless that is our goal, to make controlled tears in it. For the final laying, it's worth using a few drops of PVA glue. Traditionally, a piece of chain appeared on the model, which after lying on the mudguard was glued with a few drops of sand and ballast freeze. Tapping the model several times made it easier to arrange the chain properly, exactly as it would happen while driving. You can say that the chain adapted to itself and to the shapes of the mudguard. A tarp also appeared on the engine plate. This time it's in a different color, and I additionally matched it with a jerry can and elements of the ramrod for the German Tiger, which will be visible in a moment. I attached the towing cables to the rear of the vehicle by gluing them to the model with CA glue. This arrangement is very often seen on the vehicles from the war period. Finally, the entire model was covered with a thin layer of glossy varnish, preparing it for further weathering. First, as always, a wash, which is a mixture of dark brown, oil paint and thinner. I previously covered the entire model with glossy varnish, so now I have no problems with applying and removing excess wash mixture. In addition to details, I also use it to emphasize the texture of the cast on the turret and other elements. Of course, this darkened the green, but on the other hand, all the irregularities that I had previously created so carefully are now fully visible. I have no problems with this. Military vehicles operating in the field are more than just dirty. They are simply covered in crap, so the candle-like appearance of the model is not my favorite version of finish. As if that wasn't enough, I took a few oil paints to the action to further diversify the shades on the model, but also to make dirt caused by everyday use of the vehicle and a bit of shadows. For dilution I used Oil Expert by VMS, which speeds up the drying of paints. In other words, it dilutes and speeds it up. The perfect combo in my opinion. All these activities are aimed at building large contrasts and diversifying the surface due to the uniform camo, which in its overall appearance is not captivating. You have to manage somehow to make the model look good. This is one of the steps we take to achieve this. If you want to learn how to work with oil paints on a model, I recommend books by Michael Rinaldi, who is a master of this technique. His series of 4 books completely fill the subject, and after reading them you will have the right knowledge to use the paints on a model with perfect results. Just check the link in the description below. After finishing work with oil paints, the entire model was covered with a thin layer of matte varnish. In this way I accelerated the drying of the oil paints, protected all the work done up to that point, and reduced the effect of the shiny varnish that was applied before the wash. I speeded up the drying with an accelerator and started the next stage of weathering. This time, even though I'm not a fan of painting a lot of chips and scratches, I used VMS chip and nick paint to create the right amount of this effect. But it's not just a paint, it's magic paint. Seriously speaking, it's a reversible product. See, I paint a fragment with it, then moisten it with a bit of water and remove the paint in places where it shouldn't be. In this way, by controlling the whole process quite well, you can create the right imitations of scratches and, most importantly, in the right amount. Everything that's unnecessary can be removed without a problem. In addition to this method, I used the paint to make a delicate specking. Everything went quite smoothly and with a good effect. To build the right looking matte on the sides of the hull and on the bottom, I used a set of 4 products. Dark Earth Pigment Jackie, Brown and Black Earth Pigments and Universal Weathering Carrier by VMS. Talking about layering, it's rather pointless because everything is beautifully visible, so I will use this moment to thank my wonderful patrons. It's become my tradition, but believe me, these are people worth mentioning in every episode. Massive thanks guys for your support. The people who helped me the most are Bulldog09, Christopher Obarski, Dale Etchison, Dan Dubois, Hans Zub, Peter L, Steve Enkin and the awesome Karsten Keddy. But the people listed just now are also my great patrons. Please don't forget that you can be one of them. And I realize it's not easy these days, but if you have a few bucks you could drop in my cup, that would be great. Thanks! Oh, and one more thing. Remember that if you join for free you probably won't be able to view my work. Better try the 7 days free trial, which will give you many more possibilities. I'm back, at the right time to mention a small detail concerning the preparation of the suspension. This bent element by the drive wheel was used to collect excess mud to avoid sealing this space and just to ensure that the wheel worked as it should. It's worth remembering this when building the right look. I put some mud on the wheel and after turning it caused the right amount of mud to collect on the discussed element. A simple trick, ultimately not very visible, but if someone knows what I mean, they can look under the skirt and see if the author did a good job. The bottom of the hull was prepared in the same way as the sides, because that is how I always do it. I believe that this is the same element of the model as any other, and it should be devoted to it at least a minimum of time and effort to look right. Making wet matte stains is very easy using wet alkyd binders. As you can see, gentle dosing straight from the container is enough because the product soaks into the pigment, creating wet spots. If you want to work on them more, I recommend using universal weathering carrier, but in a minimal amount, because it's very easy to wash out the pigment you have previously applied. To enhance the look, I spread the product around larger elements and in the recesses. Still working on the same products, I started dirtying the tracks, starting with the pigment jockey, then the pigments and polishing with a silicone tip. Easy work if you know exactly what you want to achieve. The model is ready to be mounted on the base, but the base is not there yet, so it's perfect time to start preparing it. I applied smart matte to the base, which I built using a photo frame, a few balsa boards and clay. To make it easier to spread on the surface, you can add a few drops of water, which will soften its consistency, but at the same time you need to know that it will slightly change its texture after drying. Generally, it spreads very easily and shaping it into a natural looking surface is not a problem. After placing the model on a slightly dry but still moldable surface, I adjusted the wheels and tracks to the uneven terrain. Here and there I added more smart mud to eliminate unnecessary spaces that looked definitely unnatural. Generally, you need a little more time to properly arrange the model because it requires a careful inspection of all places and possible corrections. You have to remember that this is a rather irreversible process, and once the model is mounted, it will remain there permanently, especially if you additionally secure it with a screw as I did here. A simple but 100% effective way to secure the model. Additionally, when the model was already standing exactly as it should be, I used a piece of tracks to imprint the tracks in the still sufficiently soft mud. And for now I leave this part of the project to dry completely. I focused my attention again on the vehicle elements that needed a few more touches. The first thing I did was add some rust to the exhausts. This is diluted rust oil paint that I apply in small amounts and spread over the element with a thin brush. A drop of Oil Expert does the job here completely. I worked in the same way on the rear engine plate and at the cannon support. A bit of rust effect is enough to make these elements look natural. I rubbed the steel towing cables, which are quite a visible element, gently with a soft pencil, giving them a slightly shine which contrasts well with the dirty vehicle. I polished the machine gun at the back of the turret in the same way. Despite the towing cables being arranged in hooks, I additionally secured them with pieces of thin wire. The wire is 0.1 mm thick or even less, and it's pulled from an electric cable. It's ideal for tasks like this. Besides, if you have been watching my channel for some time, you surely know that I often use this material on my models. The ground is already dry and hard, so I start to dirty it exactly like the elements of the tank chassis. After applying the pigments, I started to glue the stones. A drop of PVA glue is enough so that the stone will hold securely after additional pressing into the ground. I wiped off the excess glue with cotton bud. Continuing to work on the diorama, I started to glue off beer scale modeling grass. I arranged them in tufts, leaving them to dry for a few hours. In the meantime, I started to prepare a broken wooden pole which I decided to add to the upper left corner of the base to create a visual triangle. I used a wooden stick for this, which looks perfect after proper treatment and preparing with a wood wash. I pressed the pole into the hole drilled in the base, previously sharpening its tip, which will facilitate proper positioning and securing in the ground. The grass is already well glued to the ground, so you can start painting it freely with airbrush. First dark green as a base, then lightened with yellow as highlights. The effect is sufficient for early spring, although maybe the grass should be more faded. I don't know, I've seen different versions both in photos and in reality. The most important thing is that it's painted and looks good on the diorama. In the empty spaces I started arranging dried oak leaves to fill these spaces and create the appropriate history of the terrain. You know, all seasons in one piece. I applied the same glue but slightly diluted in the places where snow is to appear. The amount of glued snow is sufficient for this time of the year. Additionally, to change its appearance a little, I gently soaked it in dark green-brown wash. The effect is perfect. By the way, look at the figure of the dead tanker which I have already attached to the previously cut out place. On one side it's located at the rear of the vehicle, but it adds drama as does the second crew member, who will be visible in a moment. The balsa planks I painted black. Tamiya paint is good enough for this task. But I can't say the same about the frame. The masking tape I used for painting damaged the surface of the frame. Unfortunately, the quality of current products is sometimes appallingly low. I had to come up with something to mask this damage, so I cut out long pieces from the model box, which I glued to the frame. It looks interesting and gave me the idea to do something like this on the whole frame next time, in a more regular way. I have a few Tamiya models to use, but I think that from other boxes you can also figure out something cool. I took the pigments I used earlier again and started applying them to the model to make dusting on the armor. This is an effective and efficient method of dirtying the vehicle. For protection I applied a little of universal weathering carrier to glue the pigments to the surface of the model. I rubbed the side surface with a dirty brush, which gave a different effect to the horizontal surfaces. Of course, I also added the right amount of the dust to the top and bottom of the turret. And note that I did the final distribution of the pigment with a white brush, which perfectly spreads the powder on the surface. Secondly, if you look inside the turret, the screw that I glued in at the beginning is still in place and will probably stay there permanently. There is no need to peel it off, especially since its cost is minimal. I can say that this is my metal signature, which I leave on both main parts of the model. For some time now I have noticed that this method is quite positively received by my viewers, and many have stated that they will also use this method in their models. Great! It's nice to read that someone uses your method. It means that they watched the film carefully. Alkyd binders and universal weathering carrier will be a good mixture for making stains for liquids. They spread perfectly on the pigmented surfaces and are visible perfectly after drying. And sharing my thoughts about this weathering step, I should say that it's really important to keep the borders of the stains rounded, just because it looks much better than the sharp ones. This is just the way the water, fuel or other liquids spread on a dirty surface. And the second important thing is to add the stains around the model just to make the surface interesting. Looking at the real pictures, we can observe that the vehicles are really stained with various liquids, and it doesn't only concern the engine plate. Sometimes stains appear in the least expected places, so on the model you can allow yourself a little fantasy painting them. At the end of the work on the model I made an imitation of exhaust fumes. Black pigment is ideal, but you can't overdo it with its quantity. To enrich the diorama with the human factor, in addition to the previously mentioned dead crew member by Evolution Miniatures, I used old figures from Warriors. I had them in my queue for a long time and finally managed to use on this project, and they fit here perfectly. In fact, I can say that the model was adapted to them, but sometimes it happens anyway. And finally, you can see the second crew member who is lying seriously injured in the hatch. Dramatically enough, right? So the project is completely finished and I'm glad I managed to build a really cool looking scene. So if you had a good time watching it, please like, comment and subscribe to the channel for more videos with my projects. As I said before, you can also consider joining my Patreon group because you can find there daily reports from my workshop, even if I don't broadcast regular videos on YouTube. And short note for collectors, all my models are for sale. Get in touch with me and we will discuss what you need or just ask what I have for sale. In the next episode I will show you some, I don't really know, maybe it will be another World War II subject. So stay tuned. That's all for today, see you next time. Cheers!